Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to get on this front end of the video as the editor to let you know that I had done a workshop at the church and I thought it went pretty well. It was called Let's Talk About Death. The question and answer portion was actually quite extensive and it didn't come out very well with the audio, but I just didn't pick it up, unfortunately. But I thought all in all, it was a good workshop. It was the first time I ever taught it. And so I wanted to present it to you. And I don't know if I'm going to have to do it in two parts or not because it was 2 hours. But if I take out the question and answer part, it might be fine. I don't know. We're going to find out, right? Okay. All right. Hold on. Here we go. Hi, my name is Francine and I have ovarian cancer. We don't know how long I have, so my job right now is to make every day count.
Yes, first litter ever.
Oh, he was your litter.
Yes, my first litter ever.
Oh, no wonder. How many siblings were there?
I think 7.
She has 17 dogs.
Look up for Kate.
Okay, yeah, I just looked out there, but go to bed. Night night. I really doubt Marshall's going to be a distraction or a disruption. Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. I told her if she was going to be a little late, that would be fine too, but all right. Hi, everybody. How are you? Good. So you know why we're here. And I've never taught this workshop before, so I'm going to read part of it, and then I will just be an expert. I mean, I've done workshops and the same ones over and over and over again, but the first time's always a little, you'll forgive me. And so I'm going to read this first part, and I'm going to go over some things about normalizing the conversation. And instead of giving you the rundown of the talking points, we'll just go. And okay, we have just for the camera, we have a service dog in here, and not a distraction at all. We just love animals. So my qualifications for this workshop called Let's Talk About Death go back to like probably 30 years. I've always been fascinated, even as a child, with death. And because I always had this gift of mediumship since I was a teenager when it came out. But then as I grew, there were more qualifications that came out. So I'm going to talk about my bio first, and I'm going to go ahead and just read this because I thought every point was important and I didn't want to miss anything. So just a few paragraphs. As a medium and clergy, I've counseled people for grief and loss for decades. This kind of counseling is not an easy thing to do sometimes. Some losses are harder than others. Some are filled with regrets, while others left with the benefit of closure. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, as someone with terminal cancer, I have an additional perspective. I was diagnosed with a rare form of ovarian cancer in January of 2023. It's called low-grade cancer, which means it spreads a little bit slower than traditional cancers, but it's still aggressive in the way it responds or doesn't respond to treatments. So by June of that year, I decided to accept it was terminal because all the treatments that we tried failed. And I'll also share a little bit more about that later. So right before my diagnosis, I had started a YouTube channel, which was about mediumship and all things woo-woo. And I just know that Spirit led me in a different direction. I had that channel going for just a few months before the diagnosis, and I realized that I could help people in a different way now, so that as my audience was growing. And now I just document the cancer journey, and I, along with some informational videos, and I have the goal of making every day count. Even when I have a bad day, it's got to count somewhere, right? So today I wanted to normalize an important conversation and address a few woo-woos and taboos about death. I want to talk about the fears, coping with mortality, releasing guilt, and finding peace. Having also played the death doula role, I also want to address how to best support other people facing end-of-life matters. So let's talk about life, afterlife, and that whole cycle. One thing I love about, being at the chapel is there's a lot of like-minded people. So I'm not going to address this from Christianity or spiritualism or Buddhism, just the basic laws of the universe as far as karma, and life cycles, things we agreed to before we were born. And so we do agree because we're all eclectic. Is that pretty much religiously eclectic and spiritually? Well, if you agree that we came from above, for lack of a better term, and we agreed to things before we were born, we're here to be challenged. But not just that, we agreed to at least try to overcome those challenges. Sometimes we fall short of the mark. And when we talk about birth, that's something we have never had problems talking about, right? How exciting. And, you talk about Ollie and, you were so looking forward to that baby coming in. And so now it's all about Ollie's growth, right? And development and all the giggles. And he's a joy, I'm sure. But we don't like to talk about ending the cycle, but it's just as normal. It's natural. It's an innate, I think it's just because it doesn't come with joy all the time. The only joy you find in death is that they're no longer suffering. So before life happened, we agreed to certain things. During life, we're supposed to enjoy those joys and use our free will. Anybody? I don't see anybody. Enjoy our free will to roam about the cabin and do good things. And not everybody does, but that's a whole different workshop. So life is linear. We're born, we go through childhood, we go through adulthood, getting married, doing all those conventional things that are expected of us. And then we reach a certain age when we know that the time is coming soon. But we always feel invincible when we're young. That's never going to happen to me. I remember being a kid looking at an older person going, how did you let yourself get that way? It's never going to happen to me. And darn well it's going to happen to you. So life is linear. And then we pass on. And then we go to the afterlife, which most of us probably believe in if you're here. And we go into maybe that same place where we agreed, made the before life agreements, and now we're going to call it the review room. And if we didn't pass the tests, or we failed the lessons, nobody's going to, slap you on the wrist. It's just the way it was, Nobody punishes us more than we punish ourselves, right? So there's a lot of guilt and things to contend with. But that's the basic process of the soul. I want to back up though, and let's talk first about the grief process, because that is the one thing that we fear the most. That's why one of the reasons we don't talk about death, because we know what's going to happen after that is the pain. Now, if you're dying, like I went through anticipatory grief already, and I had counseling for it, and I had my husband go and my stepson, we've all had that, and I feel better about having done that so that I could just move forward. As soon as I had that terminal diagnosis, I went into gear. Okay, well, this has to be done, that has to be done. I had a garage sale, not knowing I was going to be here another year and a half. And there are things from that garage sale I've had to replace. That is not fun. But at least a lot of those things are in place. I didn't want my husband to have to clean out this closet or that closet. And, there are things that I couldn't get rid of. My brother took all the family photos and things that he wanted. So there was just, I had all this done in 3 months. And then there's this box downstairs that I said, things of my mother's that my brother, Alan, didn't want. And Chris said, why don't you put in a box downstairs and I'll dispose of it after. So that was, problem solved, right? But The only thing that I haven't finished is the final arrangements, because I feel like I'm hoping that I will have that time, because I've been thinking about that. And maybe that's because I don't want to put a big period there. But I keep thinking, you know what, you still have some time. The doctors aren't able to tell me. I think it's because it's the low grade, and it doesn't show up on scans very well. They don't image well, the tumors. So it's definitely a different situation when you know that time is coming, that the probability of how you're going to go. I have oncologists in Vermont because I'm planning on going into the MAID program. If anybody knows what that is. Okay. Anybody doesn't know what that is? Okay. So it's the death with dignity. So that if I'm in that 6-month window and the doctor says, yeah, I can go to Vermont because they don't have that law in Pennsylvania, and they allow out of state visitors to go in and become a patient and hasten your death. Okay. So I had to establish oncologists up in Vermont as well. And he was very blunt. He goes, well, this goes one of two ways as far as how I'm going to go, which I don't need to go into, but it's jarring, to think, well, I don't want to go that way. And I have a video up on my YouTube channel if you're interested. It's at Francine Has Cancer, pretty much to the point. And so grief is really like anticipatory grief. I went into action. People are like, why aren't you like more emotional? Well, I have those private moments, but I think it's not because I fear talking about it, because obviously I do talk about it, but I can do it without emotions and more objectively because I've been dealing with grief counseling, all my adult life. And in fact, one person that was supposed to be here today, is her mother's in hospice, and they think that she was going this weekend. So that wasn't happening. And I had a session with a client a few days ago, and she's like, well, this is not the appointment I thought it was going to be because everything was okay. I wanted to talk about my job. And then yesterday, the shit hit the fan. And I said, that happens all the time. You may have heard of that. I mean, people then come to me and I tell them, and then they tell me their father died yesterday. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's not a coincidence. So I said, so what's going on? She says, my father died yesterday. I'm like, okay, I really, it happens, and it happens to me all the time. But, that's just a hugging session at that point because she was still in that numb stage of grief. She didn't want to cancel that appointment, obviously. So that's what I want to talk about, is the grief first. And then because that's the issue, is the pain that comes with it, with loss. So let me give you the definition of grief: is the emotional suffering one feels when experiencing a significant loss. Okay. Now, the importance of understanding grief is that it's a natural and necessary process. And some grief is a little bit more overwhelming than others. Okay, so the stages of grief, there are, let me just see in my notes, I think there are 5 of them. Yeah, so I have the stage of grief, the description, the common reactions, and the purpose. Okay, so the first one is denial. All right, so we usually know that right off the bat, and it's part of that being numb for the moment. And the initial reaction to loss is where the person may have difficulty accepting it. The common reaction is shock, disbelief, and numbness. And the purpose helps people survive the initial pain by giving them time to process the news. And the second step is anger. Feelings of frustration, helplessness, and resentment that often arise. Common reactions, outbursts, questioning the fairness of the loss, and the purpose is the anger can be a way to cope with a sense of powerlessness. So 3, bargaining. The description is the individual may try to make deals or promises to reverse the loss. And common reactions, if only I had done things differently. And the purpose is a way to regain control or prevent further pain. Like we just want to stop it, right? Because it's getting worse at that point. And then 4 is depression. So the description is deep sorrow, sadness, and regret that often follow the realization of the loss. And the common reactions are withdrawal, sadness, feelings of emptiness. The purpose is a normal response as the individual faces the weight of their grief. And finally, acceptance. Even if you are depressed and can't get out of that funk, there is an acceptance that comes. And the description is coming to terms with the reality of the loss and learning to move forward. Even if we get stuck, we're moving forward. We are living our lives, and we are now able to get tasks done, daily chores, and we know that life has to go on. And the common reactions are finding peace, adapting to life without the loss of that person or pet. And the purpose helps individuals to adjust to their new reality and rebuild their life. Now, is there anybody who has not suffered a loss? I mean, everyone has. Even if you tell me no one has ever died, no pet has ever died, you have lost either relationships, breakups, you have lost jobs, perhaps, and situations. Some situations need to be lost, but there's always been loss. And it brings a loss that we didn't want to have, that brings us sadness. So the journey of grief is a personal one and unique to each individual. And understanding that it's okay to grieve in one's own way and one's own peace is important for healing. There are no rules, right? We've talked about that before. There's no rules to grief. And, you do it in your own time. It makes me mad when people say, you should be over it by now. Hate that. I don't hate a lot of things, but there are people just not sensitive to it. And I believe that those are also people that don't want to get emotional. Those are also people that are afraid to talk about death because they don't want to comfort that person anymore. Like, they're there, right? Just pat them on the back. You'll be fine. So no rules, make no apologies. If this is what you're going through, this is what you're going through, So considering all of this, it's no wonder that, people don't want to talk about the inevitable. And one of the themes running in my playlist of my YouTube video is I share the stories of others. And they're usually legacy letters they've left behind before they passed. They're usually always people that have passed. And one of them is named Holly Butcher. And she was 27. She had bone cancer and she lived in Australia. And that's the youngest that I will cover because just losing children is so hard. And but she left a letter that was really telling. She gave advice on how to live your life and how not to care about your wardrobe or material things, and how interesting it was that people send her money, when she's in the last stages of her life, when she's like, why would I go out and buy a new dress? You know what I mean? And they didn't even celebrate Christmas except for letter writing to each other with more meaning, because she said, my parents would only get my gifts back, that she had a lot of wisdoms about her. One of the things that impressed me about her also is that she noticed that people didn't want to talk about it. Now, on a 27-year-old, it's got to be extra, extra sad, right? At least I can say I have had all this experience. I have done all of these things. Now, I don't know if she had a bucket list, but she was quite an adventurer. She traveled. I've got pictures of her on an elephant with her partner in Africa, so this kid has tried to get all the living that she could before she passed. But she said, but when I wanted to talk about death, all of a sudden with certain people was just taboo. And that was like my platform. I already had my workshop, made. And it is the one thing that, needs to open up. That needs to change. And I'm not saying you can find the same joy as you would with death as you would with, the same joy that you find with birth, and it's not necessarily celebratory, but celebration of life after the fact. I noticed that people wait a few months, and maybe that there's a reason for that, so that you can get a little bit further on your grief so that you can really celebrate and get to that stage of acceptance at that point. You know, I don't know any celebration of lives that happen as fast as funerals do, you know, but they still bring their sense of closure, you know, as sad as it might still be. But I know a lot of people say, I don't want a funeral. I mean, that is becoming more popular. I don't want a funeral. Throw me a party. So families will wait a little bit. But then there's other families that have no idea what you want. Because they don't want to talk about it. It's either us that doesn't want to talk about it or it's them that doesn't want to talk about it. So parents and children, that's the rough one. You know, you want to know what somebody wants, you know, especially when aging parents to a certain point and health is failing, and they don't want to talk about it. Better to do it when they're as healthy as possible, by the way, because the closer they get, the less they want to talk about it. And I think that that's what happened with this girl, Holly. It's like, this is too much of a reality for me. Just go and I'll take care of everything. So as a result, as a medium, I have clients that come to me with, so was this what they wanted? Are they happy with that? Did I do this right? And I'm thinking, why didn't you have this discussion when they were here? Like, yeah, I can give you some insight, but... And then there's other people that are like my Aunt Doris, I talk about her a lot. She has finally passed away at 98. She was a pistol. She had a Post-it note with somebody's name on it under every little piece of furniture, under a lamp, whatever. So when I go, this is how you know what goes to who, right? And it was like a painting that my father painted many years ago, and he and I were not close. And she goes, now I put your name behind that so Donald knows to give that to you. I said, you know what? Donald can have that. So so that was another thing. Like material goods, like dispensing your material goods is so important sometimes. You know, one of my first spiritualist experiences was a church in Deptford, New Jersey, West Deptford. And it started in someone's living room, like most of them do. And then I believe it is a church now. And my mother and I walked in, I was 16, and my grandmother had just passed. And when I sat down, she said to my mother, well, we sat down, and she said, your mother's here, and she is very happy the way you dispensed her jewelry. Well, that was the only thing that was important to her, you know, but for the most part, people turn around and go, they ask me, like, so was it okay that I did this and when I did that? And it was like, it's just material. They don't really care as much now. That was an ego thing to hold on to. So they don't want to talk about their passing, but they want to make sure everything is, you know, detailed. And I gave what I wanted to my friends before, you know, I left, you know, and had that little open house party that Molly attended. And like, because when you're told you're terminal, you think it's going to be 6 months. Like, well, how long do I have? Well, I don't know. Hi, how are you? Come on in, sit anywhere. So once you are, diagnosed like that, and the doctor didn't know how long I had, and just because of the being a low grade cancer and growing a little more slow. But I wanted to get it all done because, you know, what if I only have 6 months? So I am running around like crazy, and I'm driving my husband crazy because all I want to do is talk about it. And I don't think he was uncomfortable talking about it, but he wasn't really in the right headspace yet. Where I'm a Taurus. I just take control. This is what has to be. I have to be the strong one, you know. But that was why it was so important that we all went to counseling. And we only needed 1 or 2 sessions, and that was fine. And it was left open that if when the time does come, which God only knows when that's going to be, what's going to happen is we'll probably need more sessions. But right now, you know, I'm feeling well enough to continue. I have bad days, and I know the workshop's not about me, but that is the reality of it. Like this kid, Holly, at 27, had so much more wisdom, and you see the world through a different lens. Suddenly, things that were important are no longer important. I ran my own church on the other side of the county. I guess that's what you would say. I was in Leola. And I'll go to lunch with some of those congregation members, and it was closed pre-COVID. We wouldn't have not financially survived it. And so many people are like, I really miss CSA. I really miss it. God, that was so good, And I'm like, well, then you should have volunteered, You should have got on a committee, dang it. But I look at it like, even if I was healthy, that would not have been important for me to start up again, and I probably would have been met with the same trials. And as Molly would say, we're not always the most popular, eclectically religious. So getting a larger congregation takes a bit of work that I don't have the energy for. And I enjoy being here anyway. It's just, it's a gathering of love no matter where it is. But those things just are not as important. And so even experiences. I love having memories and I love talking about memories, but I wouldn't want to go there again even if I had the energy, But I think every little experience we have along the way culminates into self-reflection as you get older, whether you're dying actively or not. It's a little scary when all of those experiences are kind of back there. And you're moving toward that door. And you'll still have experiences, but a lot of them will be your children's experiences and just living through other people and enjoying it. And you're kind of feeling like on the sidelines. Because if I had all the energy, I don't know, I lose that motivation. But one of the things about me is that I've always loved helping people no matter what. And I don't think the YouTube channel that I have was any coincidence. I think it was supposed to start one way and then take a turn. And I think one of the biggest platforms that I find getting stronger and stronger is activating what needs to happen in the process of talking about it, So I want to ask you all, do you have problems maybe talking to other people about the inevitable? Or does a family member have that problem?